Welcome to Mindful Management, Creating a Trauma-Informed Work Environment, a podcast by Chefalo Consulting, where we share the knowledge, stories, and resources you need to create a trauma-informed culture that supports wellness, growth, and resilience. I'm your host, Shenandoah Chefalo. Welcome, everybody. I'm so glad that you're tuning in for another episode of Mindful Management, Creating a Trauma-Informed Work Environment. And I couldn't be more excited to bring you today's guest. I am delighted to welcome Nate Jorgensen, who is the Senior Director of Marketing at Miami University. And it's actually one of America's original public Ivies. So we might have to dive into that a little bit, Nate. But with over 20 years in marketing and communications, Nate has become a recognized leader in higher education marketing, bringing his expertise to one of the most beautiful campuses in the country. It's hard for me to say that as a Spartan, Nate, but I'll let it go.
I'm a Spartan too, so and I have to say we're right now. Miami is correct.
I know. Nate's career spans significant roles from web communications to academic marketing, where he has crafted award-winning strategies that marry creative innovation with educational excellence. I was fortunate enough to meet Nate, I don't know, maybe 15 years ago, Nate.
That sounds exactly right.
Long before you were a dad.
Yep.
And Nate was one of the people from my community here in Traverse City, Michigan, where I was like, I like this guy. And a lot of people know this. There's very few people where I'm like, that's a guy I want to be connected with and know. So Nate, I am super excited to have you on the show today.
I'm super excited to be here. In the meantime, I've read your book and just loved it. And I'm so glad that you reached out, and likewise on all of that stuff.
I appreciate that. And I hope maybe we can talk a little bit later in the show about Miami University and what they're doing for youth from maybe diverse backgrounds and how they're doing that. But I want to jump in because one of the things, like I mentioned, been connected with you for over 15 years. I don't know what your original role was at the Traverse City Chamber, but something in communications, if I recall correctly.
Yep, that's correct.
And one of the things about you that has always struck me is something that I call raw straightforwardness, which is I sometimes wonder if you even know how insightful you are. Do you know how insightful you are?
It goes back and forth. Sometimes I have like delusions of grandeur. Is that that term? Where it's like, yeah, I'm here to save the world, and I'm going to be the next great poet. And then other times I'm like, why would anybody hire me to do or ask me to talk about anything? So I go to complete both ends of that.
This is why I love Nate, because I see myself in you so much, right? Which is, of course, interesting because we're obviously different genders, but we're at different places in our life. You have still, by the way, triplets, everybody. Nate has 11-year-old triplets, which we'll talk about. But I have an adult daughter, right? Like these are vastly different things. And I still see myself in you because I heard you say recently that what makes you a good leader is that you're an overthinker and you're insecure. And I want to talk about that a minute because I think that's probably the complete opposite of what most people think would make a good leader, right? Like if we said, hey, define a great leader, I don't think overthinking and insecure come to that list, but it resonated so much with me when you said that. And I'm just wondering if maybe you could elaborate more.
Yeah, absolutely. I kind of just separate it into like there are a lot of jerks who are in leadership positions because they've always felt like they're right, like they're the smartest person in the room. And we see the results of that in the world. And the people who don't think, I feel the same way about parenting. If someone so chooses and wants to have kids, if you're concerned that you're not the right person to have kids, you've already passed the test to be the right person to have kids. And I think it's the same with leadership. And we just need more. We need more in every area of work where there's people who are are willing to listen to other people because they genuinely feel that way, that I need to listen to that person. And so that's what I think I kind of said recently was many of those things like insecurity, imposter syndrome, everything, when I, by chance and through some luck, but also by pursuing it, became a leader of a team and now teams, I found, oh, that is actually a strength. And you can see it in other areas too, I would just say. And of course, I'll always talk football, but like the coaches who are always trying to try something different because they're not sure what they're doing is good enough, they're usually the ones that innovate and end up becoming legends or something like that. So, uh, yeah, that's what I am
Yeah,
thinking.
I think you're coaching. Listen, you're speaking my language. Everyone knows that football is Shen's favorite season. But I think you're right because we talk about the coaching tree quite often in football, right? Like we
Yep.
have a great coach like Nick Saban, right? And they're like, oh, he produced all these other coaches, but oftentimes they can't beat Nick Saban, right? Or and we could say it about a countless number of coaches, of course, whether in college or in professional football. But there's something about that because it's are we just trying to mimic what we saw Nick Saban do in this example, or are we kind of taking what we learned and doing our own thing with it?
That's you call me insightful. Like that just burst like three lights, three light bulbs in my head. And oddly enough, I was a student manager for the football team at Michigan State for Nick Saban's last 2 years there, and then the 2 years
When we
after
loved
it.
him and then we loved to hate him. Like that
Yeah,
was
yeah,
right.
that's right. And I could, yeah, I didn't like him at the time for
Yeah,
sure,
yeah.
as someone who
When he
worked
left us.
under him. Yeah, 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 and just a such a demanding
Yeah, yeah.
person. And walking into that as an 18-year-old was an experience. But that is so true. The people who were in the building at that time, I believe there are 5 NFL head coaches, several of whom were student assistants at that time. And I could, Brian Daboll with the Giants, Josh McDaniels with the Patriots, and Adam Gase, and I'm forgetting 2 others. And they're not tremendously successful. And I think that could very well be a part of it where they're doing something that is unnatural to them. And not only is that probably not effective, it's also exhausting.
And this idea of just being authentically you. Did you try to be somebody else first?
I still do. It's a process. It's a long process. It probably started with therapy. Uh,
So
maybe
wait, listeners, hear this. People go to therapy. Because I say this all the time when people are like, Shen, what's the first start? And I'm like, how about have you checked out a therapist? Like,
absolutely. And it is like one of those things where like if they say no, it's like, well, then nothing I'm going to do is going to help. So come back to me after 10 years of therapy. But yeah, so I still try to be other people, especially when I speak. That's actually a defense mechanism. I have a panic disorder too, so I have to like play tricks on myself. And I also love public speaking because of the training that I got in Traverse City from Anli Bowden. And so I pretend that I'm somebody else. I pretend that I am Matthew McConaughey, and everyone can't wait to hear me speak something crazy that
all
he would
right, all
say.
right, all right.
That's right.
Let's
Yeah. And so then it's like, well, it's not even you up there. But then I've made a lot of progress in being authentically myself and being okay with it and being okay that that's not perfect all the time. And knowing that by being my authentic self, there are going to be bumps that you wouldn't have had you been playing the role that you feel like you should to please the person that you're working for. But just the that takes so much energy that I would end up exhausted from that. And so I mean to say, like, I swing back and forth, and I'm swinging in the right direction all the time, but it is back and forth, and it even goes too far overboard the other way sometimes, where I'm a little too honest said.
Yeah, I sometimes wonder, is that really a thing though? And the thing that resonates with me about what you just said, Nate, is that, listen, when I first met you, I was pretending to be somebody else, like quite literally pretending to be somebody else. And this is literally from the time I met you in the last 15 years, what I've been doing my career on is nobody knew I had been in foster care, like not even my own spouse and partner, right? Like I was hiding and pretending so well. I say I was the walking definition of fake it till you make it. Like I was also raised in a time where like that was supposedly healthy, right? Like we know now it's not healthy, but like I was raised in a time where it was like just pull yourself up and keep marching forward. No one has time for your tears. And that's what like, so that idea of like, let me just keep faking it, to your point, the exhaustion was so overwhelming. And right, my husband's still a practicing attorney, and nobody hires an attorney because things are going well in their life. Like that's just not a thing, right? Like things are
Right.
going really bad in your life. If you need an attorney, that's someone you love has died, you're getting divorced, you're going bankrupt, like you're going to prison. Like it's bad things, right? And what I learned through that is that when we started asking a question in our office, how could we help our clients make better decisions? Because in this fake world, it was like, oh, if we could help people make better decisions, they wouldn't need this service, right? Like it's just because they made bad decisions. And in that process, that's what forced me to go back to coaching to get my coaching certificate. And then ultimately, coaching clients in our office, I had this like, oh my God, I'm the biggest faker in the room. I'm not living authentically. I had a client who told me that straight to my face. And when someone tells you, right, like you're the most fake person I've ever met,
Wow.
there's that, of course, moment of like, let me defend myself and my character, right? Because let me show you all the great things. Look, I sit on these boards. I volunteer at all these places. I do all this community work. I can show you I'm a good person. But when someone is brutally honest, and this was my point about can you really be too honest, that sits with you, at least with me in my brain, and is like, they might be onto something, right? Because I knew I was faking it. Deep down, I knew I was faking it. So that piece of vulnerability, and to your point about speaking now, is that I find people say, how do you talk about your story so much? And I'm like, it doesn't even feel like my story. It feels like the community's story now. I know it happened to me, but there is some sort of compartmentalization that happens for me where I'm just here to share it. But I think that's when I hear the experts talk about vulnerability. I know a lot of people interpret what they think vulnerability is, but what I see from you, Nate, is living vulnerability. Like some
Yeah.
days I'm better and some days I'm not, and I sway back and forth. When I hear you say that, that to me is real vulnerability.
Oh, well, thank you. And yeah, that there was a point maybe in the journey that I was talking about before where I noticed how much it helped other people to hear that, to hear those things that are authentic that nobody else wants to say because they want to see. I do exactly what you just said. I'm on some boards at Cincinnati Children's Hospital. I just have to say that immediately right now to let you know how great I am.
Yeah, yeah,
Um,
yeah.
yeah,
Because, and we love Cincinnati Children's
of
Hospital.
course.
See,
Yeah, yeah,
right?
yeah. And yeah, so it's very worthwhile, but I do that. And yeah, it just becomes intoxicating, I think, if people would try it, where you say something vulnerable that is that certain people like yourself recognize as a truth that isn't being said, then you feel so great about that. You know, it's almost like a drug where then you're willing to get in trouble going forward for the 1 in 10 times that it will ignite something. And I have valid, by the way that business works, valid criticism at times of not always saying the right thing or showing strength and confidence. And I will take that feedback very sincerely. But also, there is part of me that is just come so far down this road from being the person that any like there's just that issue, and I know it comes from childhood and those experiences where you're just like, I just need to know what this person wants me to be, and I'll be it to make sure that they like me. Stopping doing that, even to doing 20% less of that, brings kind of that feeling inside your belly, like that kind of fire in the belly feeling where it's like, wow, like that is authentic, and it's also very beneficial, and hopefully it moved our organization along too. But there is plenty, I would say, of criticism at times, and you just have to realize that's not going to go away. And that's one thing that I'll just say real quick too, is that when some people reach out to me that have recognized the same things that you have, they say, "Well, I'm too nervous to talk in a meeting, and how do I not be nervous when I'm talking in a meeting?" I'm like, "You never stop being nervous, so stop trying to not be nervous because you're always going to be nervous. And how can I make sure that my idea isn't embarrassing? You can't. Maybe it's going to be embarrassing, and so I don't know, learning those truths, and I guess maybe the kind of the reality that I've been living in the last 11 years of having triplets with special needs and everything that comes along with that. It's just like, I just need to know what the truth is, you, because I literally need that information to be able to take care of this baby in the
Well, but it's
correct way.
also, there's also a lot of, our perception is reality. I know that, I think you believe in that as well, but I'm just listening to what you're saying. I'm like, this is so true. I literally just was in Austin, Texas at a speaking event, and how many people said, "Oh my gosh, thank you. I needed to hear that today." Right? All the things. And then somebody said, "Well, sometimes we need a talk that steps on our toes." And I thought, "Oh, I didn't realize I stepped on anyone's toe." Right? Like, it can be both things at the same time. A bunch of people who are like, "That's exactly what I needed to hear," and somebody else who's like, "You stepped on my toes." Right?
That
It's
is
like,
so true. I gave a presentation. I gave basically a speech several months ago to some education communications people like myself, and you said it in a recent podcast. Like, you get off stage and you're like, I don't think that went that well, and then but yeah,
every time for me.
but then sometimes you feel like, ooh, it did hit how at least to a greater extent than you feel sometimes. And I never really read feedback because it doesn't help me. It does so much more damage than me picking up that little thing that I could use, that it just sets me back too far. But I had that exact experience. It was all positive while I was there, and the most rewarding thing is I talked about how, like, I just wanted to talk about how I got into a senior administration job in higher ed while this crowd was more mid-career. And I kind of said, I was on food stamps at one point. After the boys were born, we had sold our house, our cars. We were living in a rental house in Dayton, Ohio, and that's as great as it seems, and a million other things. And so then I was just like, it's when you don't know if you have enough money to pay your bills, that's a whole different thing. And I was talking to a couple people after, just they were saying thank you, and that was very rewarding. And then there was this one man who was kind of hanging in the back, and he came up to me and he was crying. And he said, "I am where you were at right now." And I carry that around with me nonstop in my stomach. And just hearing your story of how you can come out the other side just gave me so much hope. And I'm still in touch with him now after a couple months, and uh, have been helping him with other advice. But so that was to a group of like maybe 100 people. That one person makes it 1,000 times worth it.
And that's the hope. That's what I hope our listeners are getting, right? Is like, there might be 50 people in that room who are like, "Nate, that was terrible. Who cares?" Right? And one human being who, by the way, is always lingering in the back, who's going to wait until that room clears because they don't want anyone to know the thing they're going to tell you. I can resonate with this so much. And I say those are the people I collect. Like
Yeah.
those are the people I've been inviting on the podcast. Those
Yep.
are the people that I've been like, come on this journey with me, because those are the people who, in my opinion, are living vulnerability.
Yep.
Not
Yeah.
just the thing we say and talk about, but like it's coming out of our pores. And that's, to me, where the real power of work culture change, all these things that we talk about, healthy organizations, it starts there, in my opinion.
I agree. And once you realize that truth, which I really do think is a truth, the opposite of that, or someone not being that, is so mind-numbingly boring that you can't survive being in any kind of professional relationship with that person, because it's just like you're never even gonna ask the right question, let alone get the right answer. And so yeah, there certainly is, and from your book and your interviews, it just certainly helped to reinforce that. And it really is kind of that funny thing that most of us talk about in mental health, where it's like that weakness of yours can be a superpower at times.
It
And
likely
that's one of
is
those
your
cases.
superpower, right? Like that's when we talk about the paradigm shift so often, we're saying it's not what's wrong with you, it's what's strong in you. Like, how do we begin seeing people not from the worst parts of them, right? Not from insecurity, not from overthinking, but like from the best parts of them, of like, oh, well, maybe I overthink. I'm like, hey, how will this impact other people? Right? Like not just thinking about myself. I might have empathy. I might have all these other pieces. So I'm curious, Nate, for you, because that is a big change. Like, I have 3 children. We're living in this rental in Dayton, Ohio, which does sound as bad as you.
It
I
is.
mean, I've
Yeah.
done trainings in Dayton. I'm right. It's the home of flight, though. Like we know, like got a lot of
Yeah.
right.
In
Like Dayton does have.
1903, it was hopping.
It was hopping in 1903. Is there a pivotal moment that happened, or a project that really defined, I've got to go into the leadership? I mean, beyond just financial gain.
Yes. Well, unfortunately, I have to say it was financial gain right off the bat, because it literally was, we're not going to be able to pay our mortgage 6 months ahead. My wife, who worked in banking previously and does all the money, told me. And so I went right into my boss and said, I need to make more money. And my boss at the time, which is exactly what you would hope someone would do, is just like, that's not going to be possible here for a long time. So if you need help finding something else, I'm going to help you find something else. And
So
that's
first, shout out to that
yes,
leader,
Mark
right?
Mark Anderson, the director of marketing at Wright State University.
Right.
Yeah.
Because listen, because a lot of them will just tell you what you want to hear.
Yep, absolutely. And so that was an example of that I didn't even realize it was that at the time. And so that was the thing that it was completely out of necessity. I'm not comfortable leading other people. And that's what I said before on some podcasts too. Like, I never ever wanted to be that person. I would love to just sit and work on websites all day long and not have to deal with drama that happens. But the reality of the professional world, and the world as it is right now, is that you have to be in a leadership position to make more money. And so it was a very black and white thing to begin with. But then when I moved on to a job at the University of Cincinnati as a web manager, and so that was pretty much the same thing, not leading anyone at a bigger university. And I was comfortable in that. And then like 3 people left or retired within my first like 4 months there. And the dean at the time asked if I would be the interim director. And 75% of my body said, no, don't do this. You have at that time like 5-year-old or 4-year-old triplets. and a million other things. And the 25% won, where I just said yes, and I'm going to go for it, and I'm going to see what happens. And then that's when I started figuring out through my own mistakes and just by living in the leadership world is that you just get better results with that. And there's eventually going to be a downfall if you're not being authentic. Like if you're always playing it off like you have everything under control, you're eventually going to end up not being seen as someone who's not in control. So just admitting that right away, and then noticing that in that case, working for a college of engineering, they found that refreshing. And I, not to be stereotypical, but maybe I am a little bit, like that's kind of the world that engineers are in, that they don't have time for nonsense, or don't appreciate it in any way. And so when I say, if they asked a question, I said, I don't know the answer to that. I'm going to try to find out. That's a really interesting question, instead of giving the rambling marketing speak that you could. That is where I guess I will say I just started to feel that as a good thing. And then you start noticing, like you and like others have as well, and then I have for others, you start connecting with those people around the world, hopefully, who are that way. And I guess I could share one quick story that might help. We were completely out of money, living in a rental in Dayton, Ohio. And my son, one of my sons who has had 13 brain surgeries, had just had his like fifth brain surgery. And at the same time, I was getting called by Wright State to come for an interview. And he had just had a surgery. So I was running between home and Cincinnati Children's. And there were 3 times when I was like, I'm a minute away from emailing him and telling him I'm dropping out. I can't do it. And then I literally thought logically and thought, what the hell? Why not just go for it, and go for it big? And the worst thing's going to happen is that you're right in the situation that you are right now anyway. So going back to the public speaking training that I had in Traverse City with An Lee, I put together this really weird speech where I was like, they're either going to love it or they're going to call security. And it absolutely crushed. And they told me later I was kind of the finalist that was just thrown in because they needed 2 finalists. And that is then there was no decision to be made after that. That it was so obviously going to be me because of that. So that's just an example, I guess, of just, we all have that anxiety within us about stuff like that, like interviewing and speaking and stuff like that. And when you just go for it, I think people who haven't done it yet will find that the reward is just so great that then it just becomes the logical thing to do.
Yeah. And what I hear in there is like, and this is a phrase that I say all the time: if you don't try, the answer is no. If you do try, there's a possible yes, right? It's not a guaranteed yes, to your point, but it's no if you don't do it.
That's 100% true. And that's the thing that I'm just, where I kind of said before, there is friction that happens with that. But once you break through that barrier, you can't stop doing it. You try when your supervisor tells you to not do it. For reality's sake, you do adjust.
Well,
But
and it just reminds me, Nate, because what I'm hearing you say really is, if leaders, and I'm going to make this as a generalized statement, but if leaders would just say, I don't know, and get a little more curious, they would actually build, without even trying to do it, a natural, healthy work culture, right? And as I hear you just talking about it, I'm thinking back to, all the implementations I do in really large systems and every one that goes successful, I know usually within the first day of training, even on a 5-year project, if it's going to go well, or if it is just going to be a hold on, this is going to be tough the whole way. Because if a significant leader stands up and says, I don't know if I buy into all of this, in my mind, when they say that, I'm like, this is going to be amazing. As soon as they have that, I'm not so sure. I feel like because to me, it's them saying, this doesn't make any, like, the more hesitant they are, almost, it's like, this will go well. And when everybody's in the room just staring at me, nodding, I'm like, this is going to be really bad. Like,
that's
it's just
really
an
interesting
interesting piece, right? Like, it's that person who says, this doesn't feel right, where it's like, oh, I know we're onto something now. Because it's like they're really thinking about it, versus the people who are like, okay, we're just robotically going through the motions.
That's really interesting. I almost thought it was going to be the opposite when you were saying that. But then hearing that they would admit that they don't know, then it does make sense.
Right?
And
Because that's what
and
I'm relating to when I'm hearing you. I'm just like, yeah, even for myself, every time I think this is the dumbest thing I've ever tried. And I think about it like, because most of my business comes through word of mouth, but right through COVID, I started thinking like, word of mouth is great. They're easy clients. They typically want to use your services, but it's really inconsistent. And so it's really hard to pay a mortgage on referral, because you just don't know when the next referral's coming, right? Like, and so I said, I got to get serious and like get standardized. And so I said, I'm going to start responding to RFPs. I know nothing about RFPs. I've never done it. And I was like, I'm just going to do it. I have one other staff member, her and I just started down this trail, and we won our first 3 RFPs. And we thought, well, this is the easiest thing ever. And we started telling people, they're like, what do you mean you won your first 3 RFPs? We're like, yeah, we win every RFP we submit. We just thought we were supposed to win. We didn't know that there's this whole industry of RFP writers helping people to try to win RFPs, right? But it's that idea of like, if you don't, then we were just like, these are the easiest things we've ever done.
that is so funny, and that's such an example of just like a business getting in the way of itself. And
Yeah.
people do that. If a lot of times, but organizations obviously do that too, where you were probably just filling it out authentically.
Yeah.
And
You
yeah,
asked a question and we
yeah.
answered
And
it.
then they're like, well, and I'm on the opposite end of those RFPs now. And I know that what you just said is true, because you can kind of see that right away. And especially when you've had an RFP in the past that the situation didn't turn out well, you realize that they're not always one-to-one compatible, what they say in the RFP process and then what they do when you're their client. That I think that's just another example of being able to see it right away. And if you are a person who is always looking at yourself that way, then you're probably doing that with other things as well. And that's, I guess, one of the things that really helps me in my work is that starting out in marketing and working for a college of engineering, I just got right to the numbers right away, because that's the language that they speak, again stereotypically. And I find comfort in that, because then I would usually say, like, here's our funnel of trying to get students. The top is 1.2 million, because that's how many we have seen our ads online. And 70,000 have clicked on those ads, and then 1,000 have filled out the request for information. And what happens from there, I have no idea. And that's literally what I've said in presentations before. So and then that was received well. And then so I've just kept doing that. But it took admitting that I didn't know what was going to happen, instead of just throwing out a bunch of percentages and likelihoods and stuff like that, and really just being sincerely interested in what they're like. I'm genuinely curious. Do I have any idea what I'm doing? We're gonna find out. And when you find out that you're just as good as anyone at the least, that is just so rewarding.
Well, and it seems to me that there's a link there with marketing, right? Because marketing just, and again, the generality of it is like, we don't know. I mean, you could have the most creative and it could sit on a shelf and nobody could click on it, as I'm sure you know. And you could do, this is the worst video or the worst ad we've ever run, and a lot of people might click on it, right? Like, there is some of that. We just have no idea what the ROI of this particular piece will be.
Absolutely. Like the saying, 50% of our marketing is working. I just don't know what 50% is. That's 100% true. But there are so many people who don't say that and say that they are the solution and that it is a sure thing. And again, that's just not interesting and not honest. And then you do find those, uh, authors or leaders in the world, like a Simon Sinek or Seth Godin, or Gary Vee. They admit their vulnerabilities, and that is what ends up working. And yeah, like, and then just being in the business world, which marketing is such a big part of, there is so much that you can just talk away in business speak, like I kind of said before. And
The
by not,
buzzwords.
yeah, then it kind of just fizzles out. Then they're kind of like, oh, well, he kind of answered it and we have other stuff to do. But then when you do answer it authentically and you find out the answer, you're so much better the next time you go into that round of work because you've truthfully looked for what was the truth. And instead of saying, well, I'm always successful, so I'm just going to keep doing what I always do, the authentic person's going to win in the end of that.
I love that. So, Nate, now that you're in this leadership role, has your ideas and thoughts about leadership changed the way in which you hire or the way you cultivate your team? Because I think that's the other issue a lot of leaders face is like, okay, I've got my stuff together now. I think I'm doing the things that I need to be doing. And maybe we've got a really good work culture. How do you ensure that you don't hire wrongly to negatively impact that culture? What are
Yeah,
you
that's
doing?
probably the most important job that I have is hiring because if it goes bad, it is really bad. And if you can both attract and find through the process who the best person is, then that is so valuable. Like it literally is the most important thing. And I probably do it without thinking about it, but I just kind of realized that I do it when you ask the question is that I ask questions that I know people don't know the answer to. And see if they say I don't know. Are they comfortable saying I don't know on an interview with four people who are, that you're by nature you're getting judged on every single thing at that time. And if they're able to say I don't know and not even that, I don't even know what that thing is that you asked me about, then that is a huge win in my book. And just like the many sayings go, you can always teach, but hiring for attitude turns out so much better. And so I would just say that without really thinking that, I probably do that pretty consistently, and try to really keep an eye during the process on, can I see if this person is being authentic and does want to do this job specifically and not just a job that they need. And we've all been in that situation too. That's not ever going to go away. And you can always find things that make you interested in that job. But when someone walks in and says, I want this job because, and rattles off why it's for them, why it matches what they know and what they're passionate about, I think they probably always go right to the top of the list when that happens, because that's what you always want, someone who's excited about their work.
Yeah, that's an amazing piece, I think, is I say this all the time, which is like, don't worry about the skills. Send somebody to training for skills. Like, it's the emotional intelligence piece that there's no training that can really make that, right? People have to kind of do their own inside out work. So we're getting close. I can't wait to hear your answers, Nate, to the quick fire questions, by the way, because I feel like I'm going to have a whole list of new information I'll need to ponder and research myself. So as we're thinking about it and thinking about all the various types of leaders, Because for me, right, leaders are like not just that you're supervising people at work, but in this case, like maybe you've got triplets at home and you're the leader of that, right? Like someone's the leader of that circus that's going on at home. So
That's my partner, for sure. She is the leader, and
right?
she does it well.
Yeah. So as we're thinking about all those types of leaders, is there one piece of advice that really sticks out? Maybe it's something that someone shared to you at one point, or something you wish somebody would have told you before you stepped into the leadership role, about something you wish you would have known before starting in leadership even.
Oh, nothing jumps immediately into my mind that's just the obvious one thing, but maybe it is a lot of things, and maybe just by talking about it, I'll have the answer. It, like we've been saying, you can always see the people who are authentic and who are admitting when they don't know. And when you see that success, that at least shows you that it's possible. So at some points, people have done that for me and gotten me to a point where then now I can do it for other people. And yeah, I guess I can't think of a specific quote, and hopefully before we close, it'll eventually pop into my head where, but what you said about marketing is so true that it can just be kind of talked away. And then the people who are authentic in saying what they don't know again, and then also are confident enough to go for it anyway. Maybe the saying that, so I finally got in my head, like the saying, speak your mind even if your voice shakes.
Ooh,
Is that,
that's a
isn't
good
that
one.
good?
Yeah, yeah.
And so maybe that was a genesis of an attitude change. And that was 15 years ago when I heard that quote for the first time. And that just gives you permission that you didn't have before for yourself. And yeah, I think that is an important quote.
It's a good one. Because I also think there's people who are in maybe, I don't want to say toxic cultures, but just okay cultures. It's not great. It's not horrible. I can tolerate it, right? Like that whole piece where I think like, but what if you just said the hard thing? Like, can we give you the courage to just maybe in that next staff meeting or team meeting or one-on-one meeting, just let's talk about this hard thing. And then would it be even just that much better, right? Like, even if it was just an incremental shift of like, hey, now instead of neutral, it's like 1% better. Like, right? Like these little pieces.
That is so true. And I'm starting to remember some of the articles that I've read that have had that big impact to me on that way. And there was an article on, unfortunately, it was the University of Michigan football team. So that actually gives the story more credit, because I do not want to say anything nice about them at all.
People who
And
know us Spartans know,
right.
Nate, that we take this very seriously.
Yes. So
So,
I'm sure when they hear this, they'll be really pretentious about it
of
and say
course, we're
how
amazing.
great
I
they
know.
are. Yeah.
Little
Uh,
brother thinks we're great.
right. Yeah. So all I'm saying is one person who was there once was, and there was, but what it was an article about an assistant coach, and he now is the head coach at Coastal Carolina. I think his last name is Poggi. He is kind of a self-made millionaire. So he has a really interesting path to becoming what is now a Division I head football coach. But he had his own wealth already established when he went into coaching. So getting fired for doing something really didn't mean anything to him at all. He only coaches because he loves it. And the story that sticks with me from the article about him is that this was during the lean Michigan years, which were awesome. Uh, he was the offensive coaches were in a meeting watching tape and coming up with ideas, and they had asked him to come in and kind of observe because they knew he would shoot them straight. And so he kind of sat there for about an hour, and then they said, so what do you think? And he said, uh, the offensive coordinator feels like none of you believe in his system, and that all of you are just doubting him all the time. and that you want to go back to the old days of Michigan football of practically running the T formation while he wants to spread it out, and you all not believing in him crushes his ability to do his job. And he said, offensive coordinator, is that correct? And the offensive coordinator put his head down and said, that's 100% correct. That's exactly how I feel. And I hate it, but then they got really good after that. But you can see why they would, that someone was able to say the thing that needed to be said. And I just always want to be that person. I'm just intrinsically motivated to be that person. I want my team to be successful. I literally don't care what I do, whether it's filing or whether it's leading. What can I do? And sometimes that is, uh, you know, jumping on the landmine for someone else that no one's ever going to know about, but helped move the ball forward. Uh, that's just the attitude that I have. And just like that article, I think the right people recognize that, who aren't trying to BS their way through everything. And because the team ends up becoming more successful, they can see the value in that. Where him saying that, or if I were to say something similar in a meeting at a different job, that can go horribly bad. And I guess that's another quote that just popped into my head. I think it's T.S. Eliot, that ours is in the trying, the rest is none of our business. And it's so true. Like I've through repetition come to the point where I'm comfortable with being uncomfortable, knowing that I'm not going to know the result. But having been observant of it, I've noticed enough times when I've turned in like 50% work that had to be 50% work because I was on a tight time frame, and it was so well received and everyone thought I was a genius. And other times where I worked on something, poured my heart and soul into it, brought it up, presented it, and they're just like, that is the stupidest thing I have ever heard. Literally both of those have happened several times.
Yes. I think for anybody who, like, if you put yourself out there, I mean, we were just saying that about being on stage. It's like the person who's like, this is life changing, and the other person who's like, we'll never invite you back here again.
Right. And I'm not for you. You're 100% right. Because if that's what you're doing, then I'm not going to fit either. That's so much easier said than done, especially for someone who has mental illness and who has all of those insecurities for whatever reason, through just the chemicals in the brain or experiences that you've had. Uh, that it just pays off in a way that other people don't understand.
I agree. What looking ahead, Nate, what you got any upcoming projects, collaborations, something you're just super excited about?
Yeah, here's a great way that my mindset and my flaws have contributed to
Because
success.
by the way, can we just say that before Nate and I started this call, Nate was like, listen, he was like 35 seconds late, everybody. And he was like, oh my God, I'm so late. I'm so sorry. Then he has all these Allen wrenches because Nate is a perfectionist, everyone. But
Yeah,
we all agree his background looks great.
thank you. Yeah, but it's not perfect. I'm not
And
completely happy with
is
it,
it
but I
you in the
appreciate.
picture behind you though?
Which one?
Of the little person.
No, that's my son
I can
Rory.
only see one child. That's why I was like, now we
There we
can see
go.
all three. Go Lions.
Yeah.
Now we can see all three. I could only see one. I was like, Nate, is that you when you were little? We love to see all your children. All right. What are you excited about? What's the upcoming project or collaboration you're excited about?
Here is a perfect example of how this pays off. I was contacted about while I was the director of marketing at UC Engineering, I was contacted by the CMO at Miami asking me to apply to be a senior director at Miami, only asking me to apply, not saying come and do this job. I did what I did in the past case. I came in guns a-blazing. And so I gave a speech in my presentation when I was one of the three finalists that talked about the number of tampons that were on the space shuttle when Sally Ride went
Yes.
up in
I
space.
love this story.
And there's probably three other things that I can't think of that were in that speech that are just like, why would you be talking about this in a speech? And most importantly, to answer this question, one thing that I had done to study for that interview is in looking through their website, I found a podcast that is done by students, and it's called Major Insight. And one of our colleges started it. And it is such a great, authentic conversation between two students admitting all the things that they're insecure about, because that's something that just fits in so well with my job, because going to college is exactly this blueprint. Everybody in their Instagram and even in real life shows you that they are in a great place and they're so ready for this and everything's going awesome. College is just awesome. And then almost every single person, when you really ask them, or if they're being truly vulnerable, they'll say, I'm scared out of my mind and I have no idea and I'm homesick and everything like that. And so I ended up listening to all of those podcasts. And then I came in as a part of my interview, I basically chastised them for not doing more with a podcast that was getting done, and basically saying, like, I don't think you all are correct in the
Love it.
value that you're assigning to this.
I love this, by the way. If I would have
Okay.
been on that interview team, Nate, I'd have been like, this guy is getting this job.
Okay. Well, thank you. And it definitely can go wrong, though. And
Yes, of course.
and since then,
Especially in higher ed, which
of
is known
course,
to be a little more buttoned up and
very true. Absolutely. It's always going to be a risk. And well, especially when someone else is doing the talking on a product, in a product like that, you're responsible, but you don't know what they're going to talk about. And to make a long story short, we've done a lot of things with that podcast now, and it has its own studio now, and it has support from the university. It's not just one student doing it in what was just an empty classroom at the time. It's an actual radio studio, and it has won. There are like 3 or 4 truly prestigious awards in higher ed marketing, and it has won gold or silver in every one of them, I believe. But at
we're
least
going to
two,
put a
two or
link
three.
to this show in
Okay,
the show notes, by the way, so people
good,
can
good.
tune in and
And it's exactly that. We've heard stories, we've heard anecdotes from people where a mom will email us and say, I heard this interview because I'm anxious for my daughter. And I took my phone into her and said, you have to listen to this because it's answering all of those things that no one is willing to ask. So I would just say that's a perfect example of like where vulnerability saw vulnerability and saw the value in it. And because of those awards now and all of the other proof that the insecure part of you needs at all time, but then also benefits you professionally, you can look and say, what I said was correct. And now everyone gets the benefits of that, and you're welcome.
I love it. I love it.
And I'm not saying that for real. I'm just, but
Yeah,
that
but
is so.
it's so important. It's like, let's just be the real, not the Instagram real, right? Like, let's just be real. Because I think that's one of the things we're missing from society is being actually connected through these things versus this, let me show you what I think I should be feeling and let's connect on that instead. So it's
So
an
true.
important piece, right?
Yep. And I would say one event that I was at brought a group of the top high schoolers from the area, like 10 of them, and let us higher ed marketers just ask them questions. And we were in DC. So I figured like these top 10 students are probably the top 10 students in the nation. And so we started asking them, like, well, how confident are you that you're going to go to the Ivy League that you're for sure going to go to? And every one of them was so authentically themselves, which is so refreshing and so good to feel about the generations coming up. And they said, we are nothing but scared out of our minds. and we are nothing but unsure about what we're going to do next, and so afraid that we're going to make the wrong decision. And all 200 of us in the room, I hope if they took it the same way, that same truth away that I did, is that we've been doing it all wrong. We've been talking to these 17-year-olds like they feel they have it all figured out, because that is what they will portray. And so then you cater your marketing and the communications to that, to either try to change their mind or try to solidify. And then once I figured that out, because it was just honestly told to me by that authentic group, then that showed that things like this podcast and like a blog that we're doing now as well, that is written by students, that's the information that they really want, but they won't say that they want it.
No, no, no. And listen, I'm a parent to a 22-year-old who just graduated college, who just started her master's program. And we've had this conversation every year for the last 7 years, right? Like, this is a big piece. Nate, as you know, we love to do some quick fire questions with you. It's my favorite part. So what's the book you're reading? You have triplets. You might not be reading books, which I can fully appreciate, but maybe you're listening to a book or television show that's caught your attention. Why did it stand out? It could be for fun or for work. What's resonating with you right now in your media?
Surprisingly, I read a lot. It is my bedtime routine for probably a half hour every night. And part of that is reading to my sons, and part of that is reading on my own. For me, what has come up recently is I got obsessed with the Vietnam War. And funny enough, kind of the thinking that I did about myself, the meta thinking that I ended up doing, was figuring out that I'm really interested in the Vietnam War because it was exactly what you and I are talking about. It was about people pretending that they knew what reality was when they had absolutely no idea. And it's just long enough ago to where the facts are now out there. The classified information is no longer classified. I almost don't bother with current events, because I just figure that it's all spun so much that it's just not worth my
Wait a
brain
couple
space.
decades,
Yep.
right? And then we'll figure it out what's
So I've read a
happening.
series of like 4 books on the Vietnam War, about the Tet Offensive, and
I find
I
that super interesting because I was a big reader in school. In fact, I think reading's what saved my life from my childhood. But I must have been in about 6th or 7th grade, and I read Letters Home, which were it was a book that was a collection of letters that soldiers who died in Vietnam had written home, but they, before their relatives got the letters, they passed away. So this deep kind of back and forth. That was a pivotal change in my life, that book. There's something about that war, I think, especially for our generation, because at least when we didn't learn about it in history class because it was still so close, right? Like, it was basically modern still happening. And so it's a big thing. But I think you're right. There are a lot of parallels to what we're talking about in the Vietnam War. So
yeah, and I know just one thing real quick that I picked up from something that has come from my recent obsession, and there have been many, so this just happens to be my current one. LBJ gave an interview, I thought like one interview between the time that he left office and the time that he died. And he said, this was a life-changing thing for me to hear. He said, I would have been more successful if I would have done nothing.
so that
That
resonates
changed the
with
way I
me.
look at things. I'm
Well,
sorry.
it resonates with me because this is something I say about the child welfare system, is that we would actually be more successful if we did nothing,
And I
like
don't
every
think
day.
people ever see that as an option. And I've kept going down that road and found other proof points of that, because then I'm like, I am doing the thing where I'm just confirming a certain side of an argument.
Yes.
But
Confirmation bias is real. That's a real
right.
thing.
Yeah, but just finding so many examples of that, like I think it was Chuck Noll or another old past NFL head coach that had a quote that said, "When you're struggling, do less, focus on less, not more." And I just think that is so true. We're especially in marketing, we're always throwing in the new project because you kind of always have to be seen as doing that. And there is value in that at times, but there is also a lot of value at times as let's not do other things right now and let's focus on this thing to get it where it needs to be. Where in many organizations, like LBJ would say that he was in uh, for in his situation, where that's just the reality of the situation that you're in, where you have to do some of that and that doesn't excuse him, of course.
No,
Uh,
but there is some power in what he's saying, and the realization that he has had post looking back, right? Hindsight's 2020. So maybe that's your dinner choice, but let's see. If you could have dinner with a historical or contemporary leader, who would you choose? What's the question you would ask them?
it's Frederick Douglass. I There was another obsession that still lingers with the Civil War, and that's not what Frederick Douglass is. That's not why I'd say Frederick Douglass necessarily, but it got me into that era of time, and that really started from there was a point when our politics were starting to go insane. Sorry, that's probably not the right word to use. Our politics were going downhill, where I really was really being authentic and saying, how did we get here? I really want to know how we got here because it's weird. And through authentically researching that, you have to start at the Civil War. If you don't go further back than this, or if you don't go at least to the Civil War, you're only learning what the effects were of stuff that happened before. So I would, but of all the main players in that time frame, I'd want to talk to Frederick Douglass. I'd want to ask him every story about being born into slavery and then escaping slavery and then becoming the leader that he was and the unflinching leader that he was.
I love that use of that word because my question almost would be, were you unflinching? Or is that right? Like, because this is what we were just talking about, is like, are you just standing to appear unflinching, but underneath that you're scared or you're insecure or you're all the things we've been talking about, right?
Yeah, I would hope that I could convince Frederick Douglass, reincarnated Frederick Douglass, to be vulnerable and answer my questions that way. That would be super interesting. But even just knowing more about his thoughts, I think that would help me more understand the realities of our country. That would be the best possible way to do that.
I love it. What's filling you with joy, Nate? What's the hobby activity when you're partaking in it? You lose track of time. You could just do it forever.
I literally don't do any hobbies, and don't have any friends.
This is what happens when you have triplets.
It is, yes. I tried joining a basketball league, and that just made me feel nothing but inadequate.
I saw some of your posts about, hey, we're like 0-3 or something.
We were,
right? Like, yeah.
and that was mostly because of me. And so that I've tried things. I've tried to take that very little amount of time and try to feel like a real person again. And it's super hard to do. The things that I do get to do every so often, and if I just had time off and was able to follow my passion, is we have an old house that we live in. I would just completely be working on the house nonstop.
I love that.
Yep, and watching YouTube videos on how to drywall, and then hopefully start getting better at drywalling.
I don't know how I lived before YouTube, just to clarify.
Very much so. You paid for everything. You paid for someone to come do something, or you just didn't do it too.
I grew up poor, so we didn't pay for much, so we just didn't have it, right?
That's right.
And so I love YouTube because I'm like, oh, I need to change this part in my stove. Let me YouTube that.
That
And
is
some
super
person
interesting.
will just show me and tell me how to do it. And now my stove works again. And
100%. And
I
it's
found some
all
wholesale marketer who sold me a $3.25 part, right?
that's great. Yeah, and it's a great system and it's not perfect, but like that and other online communities, all the information sorts itself. So when you search how to drywall beginner, the first video that comes up is the first one for a reason. And so it's just so great that that's just such an efficient system. And I think the having something real that I can see that I did, that I improved, that I fixed, that is very rewarding for me. Probably because most of the work I do is in the ether. It's on a website that no one sees, or it's a podcast that you can't hold a podcast, but so that maybe it satisfies that part of me. Yep.
Nate, it's been great having you on our show today, but how can listeners get in touch with you? What's your platform of choice? What's the best way if people have other questions or want to invite you to come talk to them and their teams? How can they find you?
You can find me on LinkedIn. That is my only remaining social media since Twitter was ruined. And so, yeah,
Like
just
many of us. Yep.
yeah, search my name, and I'm at Miami University in Ohio. There might be a couple other Nate Jorgensens, but yeah, please, if this resonates with anyone, please feel free to reach out, and that's the best way to get a hold of me.
And we have to sometimes tell people it's Miami University in Ohio, not the University of Miami in Florida. These are different places. People get
That's
confused
correct.
sometimes.
We experience a lot of weird things with that, like applications for a job posting from Coral Gables. And I'm like, is that just a complete coincidence? I doubt it. And but that's something that we need to work on branding wise. So it's a good challenge.
All right. Nate, thanks so much for coming on. We'll put links to how to get a hold of Nate in our show notes, of course. Thanks again for all of you for tuning in today to Mindful Management, creating a trauma-informed work environment. For more resources and helpful tools, please head over to chefaloconsulting.com. If you enjoyed today's discussion, show your support by liking, commenting, following, and reviewing this episode on your favorite podcast platform. Your feedback helps us reach more and more listeners and brings even better content your way. We'd love to hear from you, so please drop a comment on Spotify or YouTube and share the topics you'd like us to cover. You run the show. We want to hear from you. And if you know someone who you think would make a great guest, maybe it's you, then drop us a note as well. We'd love to invite you on. We'd love to hear your voice. As Nate said, it might be the thing you just need to say yes to, right, Nate? It's their time to say yes, even if they're scared. Thanks.
Go for it.
Yes, go for it. Thanks again for listening. We can't wait to catch up with you next time. Have a great week. Thanks, everybody. Thanks, Nate. Mindful Management, Creating a Trauma-Informed Work Environment is brought to you by Chefalo Consulting. To learn more about Chefalo Consulting and our trauma-informed change management and professional development solutions, please visit chefaloconsulting.com. That's Chefalo, CHEFALO, consulting.com. Make sure you don't miss these transformative conversations by subscribing to Mindful Management wherever you get your podcast. Thanks for listening. And remember, change happens one step at a time.